November 9th marked the 30th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. For 28 years, it separated East and West Berlin and was a symbol of communism and the Iron Curtain in Eastern Europe. Carolee McGrath sat down with Thomas Maulucci, Associate Professor and Chair of History at American International College, to talk about this historic event and what it means 30 years later.
Well, East Germany had been established in 1949. It was the Soviet zone of occupation, and it was pretty clear by the time you got to 1946, 1947, as the Cold War was beginning to break out, that part of Germany was going to be put under a Soviet model. And the East German Communist Party, the Socialist Unity Party, was very instrumental in getting the Soviets to agree to the creation of a wall in Berlin. And this actually initiated a period in East Germany for about 10, 15, maybe 20 years in which the economy begins to stabilize and kind of a social welfare state begins to develop there. So it settled things down in terms of international politics, but of course it's also a tragedy. People are still trying to escape from East Germany to the West, and the official figure is 140 people who were killed at the wall, which was a 27-mile barrier, basically around the western zones in Berlin.
Right, and then the Cold War started.
Cold War starts, yes.
So a whole series of events really started a chain reaction in Eastern Europe leading up to 1989. Talk a little bit first about Poland, and I know that there was that historic visit of St. John Paul II in 1979.
Yes.
What was going on in Poland?
In Poland, the economic situation in the 1970s was pretty bad, and this also was a time of détente with the West. And what happens is a lot of dissident groups pop up in the Soviet Union, pretty soon in Czechoslovakia. In Poland, because the economic situation is particularly bad in the 70s, and also because the Poles also see the Soviets / the Russians as foreign occupiers and had a long and very bad history with them. By the time you get to 1979, the Pope's visit has this tremendous impact. It actually encourages Poles that are opposed to the communist system in some way, that they have a lot of support and encouragement from the outside. And then in 1980, of course, the workers at the shipyard in Gdansk in northern Poland are going to go on strike, and they are going to begin demanding recognition as an independent trade union. And that was something that was very dangerous for the communists, because all organizations basically had to be controlled. There could be no kind of private sphere of social structures outside of the supervision, anyway, of the Communist Party. And by the time you got to 1981, Solidarity was actually bigger than the Polish Communist Party in terms of the number of members. And even though Solidarity goes underground in 1981 as martial law is declared by the Polish government, it still is operating underground. It still is being assisted by the Polish Catholic Church and by others. And in 1988, as all kinds of changes are happening in Eastern Europe, the Polish communist government decides it has to kind of sit down and negotiate. And so that's going to lead to talks that become the roundtable discussions in 1989 and eventually lead to a democracy.
And in 1987, President Ronald Reagan made that famous speech at the wall,
Yep.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. 2 years later, all of the events happened. Talk a little bit about Reagan's role in the collapse of communism.
He, of course, first came in as a Cold Warrior, undoubtedly, and I think that he caused a lot of fear and anxiety amongst the communist governments, especially because he was talking about rearming the United States and using a lot of high-tech weaponry. And this idea of an arms race that maybe that they could not keep up with, especially at a time of economic difficulty, was something that the communist governments didn't really want to envision. I think that that quote is very famous. I think Ronald Reagan definitely was someone who was there at the right time, but you have to remember also that all American leaders since 1947 or 1948 had been expecting the Soviet Union to collapse and maybe be using pressure in order to make it collapse. And so I think Reagan was the right man at the right time. I do think far more important than Reagan, though, for the end of the Cold War was Mikhail Gorbachev, the Soviet leader, who becomes the first secretary of the Soviet Communist Party in '85. He basically decides he's going to change around Soviet foreign policy and make it more collaborative and cooperative. And so that's why you get the Intermediate Range Nuclear Missile Treaty in 1988. And the other thing to think about is he tells the communist governments in Eastern Europe, we're not going to send the Soviet tanks in anymore if you guys get into trouble with your own populations. You need to reform the way we are. A later advisor of his apparently called this the Sinatra doctrine. I did it my way. And so Gorbachev is really a fascinating figure to me because basically he agrees to these reforms. They get out of hand, in the sense that they are definitely going to lead to something other than the continuation of the communist system. And yet he doesn't intervene with force, which he could have easily done. And that's not really a normal behavior for a ruler of a powerful state.
So the impact of 1989, of the fall of the Berlin Wall, just describe that for us.
I think it really was kind of this unbelievable year. All these marvelous things seemed to happen. Early in 1989, the Hungarian government opened up its border with Austria, and so all of a sudden there was a hole in the Iron Curtain. It was obvious by summer that Poland was going to have a democratic government as a result of the roundtable discussions. The United States invaded Panama to get rid of a pretty nasty leader there called Manuel Noriega. He was knee-deep in the drug trade as well. And a few weeks later, South Africa lets Nelson Mandela out of prison. And then, lo and behold, November 9th, 1989, all of a sudden the Berlin Wall comes down. And there was this, for an outside observer, it seemed like a year of miracles. I think, in retrospect, I think people are a lot more sober about what happened in 1989. It was the symbol of the end of the Cold War, of the end of the communist regime in East Germany. I think, 30 years later, looking back, a lot of the hopes of that era, were not realized. People thought it would be an era of great new international cooperation. People thought that democracy was going to sweep across the world and really entrench itself. So much so that one political scientist talked about the end of history, meaning that everyone would accept constitutional democracy. People thought the free market was going to spread around the world and be unproblematic. And I think in retrospect we're a lot more sober about the world that we live in today, and perhaps missed opportunities. And I know that despite the initial euphoria in many places in Germany, there still is a big split between East and West Germans, and many East Germans feel that they were treated at the time as second-class citizens. They were simply absorbed into Western Germany, and even today, wages, the level of retirement pay, and other things have not caught up to the levels in the West. And so, the question is this going to be a generational thing? Will the conditions continue to improve as they have, and maybe in 30 or 40 years we won't be talking about this divide anymore, or will we still have this maybe psychological East-West split in the country?